Welcome to the Wednesday Wind Down with Dan and Friends, the webinar and YouTube show for people that like to be outdoors, people that like to hike, maybe people like to drink beer, get together and bullshit with their friends. Cheers to that. All the above. And if you're having a hard time doing it because of COVID, this is a place for you. So that's where this is born of. I'm Dan Conger. I'm the host. And tonight I'm drinking a Walker 805.
Is that a pale ale? What do you got? What is that?
The Walker 805. Yes, it's their pale ale. It's properly chill. I'm chilling.
Chill with I've got Pizza Port Chronic Ale. It's an amber.
And you're Dave Cowan.
And I am Dave Cowan. Yes.
Okay, all night long. Awesome. So tonight we wanted to talk about sleep systems, and I specifically called it sleep systems because it's not sleeping bags, it's not quilts. There's lots of things that go into it, right? Because, I just thought of something. There was one trip, and it was actually Sandra Groh's evaluation trip. We talked about this weekend, that I got out, and I'm her evaluator for the Sierra Club leadership outing. I get out there and I set up my tent. I pull out my cook kit. I pull out my sleeping bag. And I go to, my pack is empty. I had no sleeping pad. Got a rough night ahead of me, and it was going to be chilly that evening. So fortunately, Teresa McNaughty had 2 air pads. Wow. So Princess in the Pea, and she let me use one of her air pads. It's like, and it was just one of those weird coincidences. So anyway, definitely part of the system. So we're going to talk about pads. We're going to talk about the insulating layer. So whether it's a quilt or a sleeping bag or whatever else you use, pillows, and then maybe some extras. So, and if throughout the period, if you got questions, throw them either in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll catch them. So, so let's start off talking about pads. Couple of different categories of pads. So probably the most popular one are air pads. Dave, do you use an air pad or do you use something else?
I principally use an air pad. Sometimes out in the desert, I'll go with a closed cell foam.
Okay. So
doesn't need repairing.
Air pads. What's interesting is air pads have gotten super, super popular in the last 5 to 10 years. Before, air pads were like a super luxury item. And there were
those self-inflating pads that were still air pads, but they had the foam that would fill up to, whatever, a half an inch.
And that occurred to me. So that was really what Thermarest came to market with, right? They came with the self-inflating one. You'd unscrew it and it would just poof up on its own. Now, are self-inflating air pads still really on the market?
They are. Okay. Thermarest still makes them. They call them the ProLite series.
Okay. Right. So what's way more common now is an inflatable air mattress, what we would have called an air mattress 20 years ago, and 30 years ago, which you used in the swimming pool to float around on. Yeah, a lot lighter, a lot more durable. So one of them, the one that I use is Thermarest's Uber Light, right? It's a very thin, light material. I get about 2 inches of insulation for 8 ounces, which is like outstanding as far as weight. Although one of the drawbacks with air pads, you see that little boo-boo right there? And there's another one down here too, and there's actually 3 on this one. So
only had that since the spring?
I've had it, just a little over a year. Yeah, I was thinking it was a year and I was going to return it to REI. But so you do need, one of the things about air pads, you need to be proficient at finding leaks and repairing them. Let's talk a little dipper about that one, because we had a summer trip where we had hole after hole after hole, the 2 of us in the lake trying to find the holes. So that is one of the downsides of them.
The snow melt lake, right? The nice cold snow melt.
Different lake.
Oh, okay.
So have you ever, Dave, had you had any pinholes or anything on the trail with air pads?
I have. I've had that happen to me twice, and only twice. And I was unable to find them, but it was slow enough I could still get a few hours sleep.
Right. And generally what I find is the big holes you can find pretty easily just by putting it up your cheek and finding out where that is. The pinholes that take 2-3 hours to deflate, which is really annoying to wake up several times a night to blow it up. Those I got to put them in the bathtub, stand on them, and actually submerge them, or in a lake to find them. So, couple of different repair systems on those. So, what's great about those, super compressible, they pack really nice. Mine gets really small. I think that's one of the, and they're damn comfortable. I'm a side sleeper. An air pad makes all the difference in the world for me.
Yeah, even on your back, the old Thermarests, the ProLite, what they now call the ProLite, and the Ridge Rest, you would still feel it. And these, you can still feel it. I mean, I still move around a fair amount at night, but it's so much nicer.
Agreed. So there is a category of air pads. Well, you know what we need? We'll come to R value a little bit later on. So next general category of pads are foam pads. So we've got closed cell and open cell foam pads. Open cell foam pads. For me, an open cell foam pad is the 4-inch, 6-inch chunk of foam in the back of the Shaggin' Wagon.
I think you may have just dated yourself a tad.
That's all I can think of is in the van, in the back of the painted hippie van we've got a big chunk of open cell foam. An open cell foam is a sponge, right?
Pretty much.
Yeah. So it gets wet, it's going to hang onto that water, baby. Nice and soft, but not really practical for backpacking. So closed cell foam, 3 times real fast is what's way more common, and definitely more entry available. So this is a Thermarest Z-Lite, but this is the stackable one, but then there's also the other type that's going to roll up. Big, right? That's a big old thing. It's not going to fit inside your pack, or it's going to take up half of your pack. Not
too heavy, but heavy, at least about the same weight as like the very common what's that, Neo Air.
Right. I want to say this is like 12 to 14 ounces, somewhere in there. So it's just under a pound.
Yeah.
But if you're 18, this is fantastic, right? This is, if you could fall asleep in dirt, this is a way improvement over dirt. But honestly, I'd say once you're older than 40, once you hit 50, there's no way this is going to work for me.
Happy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Here's another closed cell foam that I really like, and this is Gossamer Gear's 1/8-inch pad. Really light. Now, are there really people that sleep on this only?
The 20-year-olds.
Okay, or a Tibetan monk or something, because I just couldn't. I mean, I would feel every grain of sand, let alone a pea underneath her. So the reason I use this as a combination. Well, I do two things with this. This is my sit pad. I'll fold it up, use it as a sit pad, or lay it out and recline on it. Okay. The double use is it goes underneath my Neo Air, which is a little bit more, it's definitely more delicate. So I use it to help protect that layer. And then what I've talked about in my gear hacks or modification is this is great building material, right? You forgot the insole for your boots or a splint, right? You could cut this up and do all sorts of cool things with it, which is someday I'm going to have to get a new one because this is now probably 18 inches shorter than it used to be. It's a raw material, right?
That's a good value for what you've gotten out of it, though. So, but you just reminded me when you said sit pad, they also sell the chair kits for the Uberlite and the inflatables.
Yeah.
Adds another 6 at least ounces, I think, for the nylon and the little plastic stays. And I have one. I've had one for a long time, and I haven't used it in a long time. So
right. And I've had those chairs before, and I was always very nervous about where I was going to use it, right? Because it's one thing to be comfortable sitting around, but man, if you're going to sleep, you don't want to put holes in it and then at night be sleeping on rocks.
So yeah, you got to be, you still have to be very careful, but it's another potential for multi-use, or making a secondary use, although you still have to have another piece of gear for it to really work.
Yeah.
And I found it wasn't necessary in the end. I just now lean up against I take one of the little sit pad and I just lean it up against my backpack and use that as a backrest.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. So then there's also that strategy of kind of doing what I'm starting to do with this one. I'm doing this a little bit mainly for protection, but there's a little bit of a insulation value increase, right? So Dave, on your research, what was your what'd you kind of find out about a little bit about R values? Like so R value being the ability to insulate from the ground and prevent heat loss from direct contact with something, right? Because if you lean up against a cold rock or cold wall, you feel it just sucking the heat right out of you.
Yep. So without going into,
we don't need the science
relatives of R value, but it's a scale, and the higher it is, the more insulative it is. So the Uberlite I checked, and it says it has an R value of 2.3.
Okay.
The Neoair X-Lite, which is the yellow one that was really popular, it's still very popular, 2.5 inches thick. They're all the air mattresses are about 2.5 inches thick. That one ends up with an R value of 4.2, which is pretty darn good. Yeah.
4.2 for an AirPad. Okay, so is that the high end of the spectrum on AirPads?
Tends to be the higher end, but they also have the Neoair X Therm, and I don't know, I can't find if I got numbers for that one, but that's actually even higher. It's 5. Oh, there it is. 5.4 for the R value.
So
that's the ProLite, or I'm sorry, that's the Neoair with like a Mylar coating on the inside to be more reflective.
Okay.
And the one that you have there, that silver lining, is the same thing. It's yellow on one side and silver on the other, and that's to try and break up, radiant heat loss.
Now, where do foam pads kind of fit on that scale?
Foam pads come in around 2.
Okay. Okay. So what's interesting is the conventional wisdom had always been that air pads didn't have as good an R value compared to foam pads, and that you should layer the two of them. And that's not necessarily true from a true R, just from a R value perspective. If you have you may have a good R value on a pad, but we're just going to say right here is, so pads do two things, right? They're going to comfortable, which is why air pads are fantastic, is they're super, super comfortable. But then there's that insulation ability if you're especially if you're a cold sleeper. So that concept of layering pads is completely valid. So someday I'll look up what the R value is on this. It's minuscule, but I'm getting something out of this and my AirPad.
Yeah.
If I was going to be sleeping on snow, I might use this and the AirPad.
Yep. And that also reminds me, I'm blanking on the name of the manufacturer, but somebody out there actually makes an AirPad with down in it.
XPED does.
XPED, that's right.
XPED down. It's XPED down mat. Mat.
And the idea for them is to sort of eliminate the need for having the extra foam pad. The down isn't for warmth in itself. It just prevents convective air currents. So you've got it on some very cold surface, and you'll get little cold air currents, and the down in there breaks that up. So it provides better insulation.
Okay,
because
so
when I first heard about it, I'm like, well, that just seems absurd. And then I read about the justification, like, okay, that's not absurd, but I'm not going to try it. I
think on with that, I think it'd be really critical the way you inflate it, right? Because if you inflate it with your mouth, you are putting some moisture in there. Yeah. Generally doesn't matter for these air pads. I never sweat it. I never worry about it. But if you had down in there an organic material, that would be pretty important. So.
That could crawl away on you one night. If something escapes. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the insulation layer, the layer that's going to be around your body that's going to keep you warm. And you notice I didn't say sleeping bag because there's two major categories that we want to talk about. There's sleeping bags and quilts. So I'm going to grab sleeping bag first because neither Dave and I really use sleeping bags much anymore. So I've got my big ass. This is a 10-degree winter sleeping bag. I sleep warm. So 10 degree for me is Arctic conditions, when I might ever use a 10 degree. So a couple things about this 10 degree sleeping bag. So there's a big ass zipper, but it's got a full, none of this is going to demonstrate very well, but it's got a full draft tube, right? That hides that zipper. So any drafts that come through there gets blocked by that. This has a hood that will cinch down, all right? And then inside, we can also see there's a bit of a collar that goes around your neck. So I've got the sleeping bag with the collar around her and the hood and a draft tube. And then this thing is just ginormous, right? It's really gonna I have to really press the air out of it. So this takes up an entire tote. This is a big. So sleeping bags, generally, mummy bags generally are going to have a hood, generally going to have a draft tube, generally going to have a full length zipper. So,
and most people, well, certainly the industry pushes towards mummy bags. They're because the other option is just a square cut. And I've got a buddy who will only use a square cut because he hates he's not a particularly big guy, but he hates having the sensation of this thing pinching in on him. So he's like, no, I'll take the weight penalty, but I want something that is just square all the way down, and so I can move my feet around as I want.
And my wife is claustrophobic, so putting her in a mummy bag is like her nightmare, right? My brother told me a story about going into a particular outfitter with three initials, and it was a mummy bag, and the guy zipped him up to let him test it out, and then laughed at him and didn't immediately let him out.
Oh, not cool.
That's a big D move.
Yeah. Like, yeah, I'm interested, but I'm going to go buy it somewhere else.
Exactly.
I had a trip I did years ago with a guy his name is Big Kirk, and he's a big guy. He slimmed down to 315 for this trip. And he went in to buy a bag because we were going to be in cold conditions. He had to buy the extender that Mountain Hardwear sells, which is just a triangular wedge that comes down that you zip in on either side because he couldn't close the bag up.
Yeah.
Because you're such a big guy.
And then the inverse can happen, right? If you're a small person and you're in too big of a bag, your body's never going to heat that up because just in concept, sleeping bags or insulation does not make you warm. It's retaining your body heat. And if it's too big of an area, you're never going to heat that up.
Yep.
So the other category that we're going to talk about is quilts. And that's what Dave and I have been using, and a lot of my friends are using right now. I actually have this is a Z-Pax. It's technically a quilt. First thing we're going to notice is this is the top. There is no mummy hood to it. Okay. So there is no overhood. It just comes up to your shoulder. And I think I got a long so I could scrunch down. This one is interesting in that it does have a zipper. It's a 3/4 length zipper, but there is no draft tube. So this is either you could call it a zippered quilt, which is a 3/4 length, or you could call it a lightly featured sleeping bag. It's probably more of a zippered quilt. When this came, I did two things on this one. I dropped down a temperature rating. So this is a 30-degree bag. And when it came packed in this bag, my wife looked at me and she says, "You need a bigger pillow." I'm like, "Sweetheart, that is my sleeping bag." She says, "That is crazy talk." So, Dave, what do you think the biggest benefit over a quilt or a sleeping bag, or which do you prefer? And what do you think is the benefit of one over the other?
So in any sort of 3-season conditions, I would definitely go with a quilt. The best argument is if you have a traditional sleeping bag that you've got zipped up and half of the down is on top and half the down is underneath. When you're laying on it, you're compressing all that down that's underneath you. And as we were just talking about, the way it works is by creating dead airspace by lofting up. So the down underneath you is doing you no good whatsoever.
Right.
So option would be to unzip it and lay it across you like a quilt, which a lot of people, and I used to do that sometimes, certainly when it's a bit warmer. But now you've got about at least a third of material that you don't need. So that's dead weight now that you're carrying. So I'm in for the quilt for that very reason, because it covers the top of me, which is what needs the insulation, because the insulation underneath me is coming from my pad or combination of pads. Right. If you're on the snow, that's really what that's doing. It's not anything coming from the sleeping bag itself.
Absolutely. I'd 100% agree. And I think that's how I transitioned to a quilt is I have another light mummy bag that I still keep around as a loaner. And I would find in hot weather, I would lay on the pad and drape that over me. And that's essentially, I'm using a sleeping bag as a quilt, and it opened up the world. I'm trying to think if there's, and I don't know this because my quilt is from a cottage manufacturer, a small manufacturer. Are there some major manufacturers dabbling in quilts? I think Thermarest is.
Thermarest is doing it now. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And I think they're,
they're now coming up with systems themselves. So
Mhm.
they also they have a line of quilts, and I think they also have a line of sleeping bags. But I think they're not emphasizing that. They're just going on the they've watched enough blogs of through hikers, and they're jumping on the quilt bandwagon as well.
Yeah. So one last thing before we leave insulation and quilts is you had mentioned the idea of there's been what's been called a top bag before. So it was a sleeping bag that was all the way around you, but the back was just nylon and you would slide your pad in it. So the pad, what was kind of nice about that system is the pad wouldn't slide around. It never would. You would be in a sleeping bag. You could zip it or unzip it. Kind of an interesting concept if you're not quite ready for that move to it. So it has less insulation than a full sleeping bag because, as you mentioned, the stuff beneath you is going to be smashed down.
Yep. And the other thing about quilts that people need to keep in mind is you can get drafts. If you toss and turn a lot, you could shift it off of you. If you're in a zipped up sleeping bag, you'll just end up with your face down or something, or the hood turned around to the side. With the quilt, it might slide off of you. So
that's a good point. Yeah.
Most of the manufacturers now have some sort of a fastening system, so you can put a piece of cordage on your pad, and then it'll clip on either side, so you can move around and it just keeps it in place. Or nice. What I usually end up doing is throwing a bivy sack on top of my system is the final part of my sleep system.
Okay.
And that gives you complete wind coverage, so no wind gets to you anyway.
Okay. So pillows.
Love them.
I think when I first started off, I'm like, oh, I don't need a pillow. Might have been when I was 18 as well. I don't need a pillow. I got an extra jacket. And you know what? I'm going to live life large, and I'm going to throw that in my sleeping bag stuff sack.
Yep.
God. No, it does not work. Well, it does work. It does work if you don't need a pillow. It's bonus. If you need a pillow, if you like a pillow, that is absolute baloney. It does not work. So
you end up like this, and it squirts between your elbow, or it kind of pops out. It doesn't generally do much, but when you're young and you're living life large, you just sleep like a log anyway.
That's right. That's right.
That's how you can get away with that 1/8-inch foam pad.
Yeah. So I've been using an AirPad for a couple of years. This is a Big Agnes AirPad. That's actually pretty nice. This is sub 2 ounces. I want to say it's like 1.2 ounces. And when we talked about this the other day, what was this? I want to say it was around $30. And I was looking at my kit, and being the nerd that I am, I said, if I get this pillow from my other pillow, I'm going to save this many ounces. It was just a couple ounces, but I'm going to save this many ounces, and it's only going to cost me $30. So this is going to be $15 per ounce to save. I'm like, well, to get a DCF tent is, like $35 or $45 to save an ounce, or more. It's probably $75 to save an ounce. It's like, oh God. So yeah, of course I bought the pillow. There's another, I'm trying right now. I'm going to be trying the Climate pillow, which is, it's got an X in it. And I'm going to try that one. And they've got a free promotion where you pay for shipping. So I paid $10 for it. So I'll test that out. But I found that pillows make all the difference in the world. My thought on pillows, especially this one, has a bit of that depressed center, but for the types that are more blimpish and more round, really keeping them soft. I think that's really important to give them some cush.
Oh, absolutely. If sometimes even with the sleeping pad, I'll blow it up, and if it cools off in the evening, it'll come down a little bit. But if it's not, I inevitably, when I'm on the pad, I'll just open it up a little bit, because you can fill them up hard enough that they're uncomfortable. It's like a plank.
Oh, yeah, right.
That's kind of the idea. And
it's like sleeping on.
Get yourself on there and just give it a little touch, and yeah. And the other thing sometimes that I'll do, that Jim Kurtz suggested, and I like the idea again because we're under tarps and sometimes in the bivy sack, is to actually use your shoes underneath you at the head. At the head, you tuck your shoes in with the heels up, and you put the pillow on that, and that helps give you can set it apart so you have a little space in the middle. Wow. And it keeps all your stuff tight and compact. And it works very well.
What if you have stinky feet though?
Yeah, that's an issue. But and once you're out for a while, the rest of you stinks.
Everything stinks.
Yeah. So
Okay.
You deal with it.
Okay.
Backpacking has some hardships to it.
That's true. Okay. Well, there's a couple other extras that go in there, and you mentioned this, Dave, was that transition of if you're going to be colder than expected. You talked about clothing.
Right. So that's, I can definitely consider that to be part of the sleep system as well. So, you want to dress for the expected conditions. There's no reason to take, a pair of down trousers when you're going into 60-degree weather. But if it turns out to be a little bit colder, and you can, one of the nice things about the quilt as well is you can keep adding more onto it, and the quilt just sits above it. And like this buddy I told you about, Big Kirk, he could barely get into a sleeping bag. And if he, on that trip, had tried to put extra stuff in and zip it up, he wouldn't have gotten any warmer because it would have been compressing it because he's maxed out the tube. But without anything on the bottom, if you put a down jacket on, the whole thing just sits a little higher. And now you actually have that extra inch or two in the insulation.
And that's how I treated mine, is when I went from a 20-degree bag to a 30-degree quilt, I was a little nervous about changing temperature ratings. Like, am I going to be comfortable? And I remember bringing my down puffy on a few trips, even though I knew I didn't need it in the evening, just as an extra, right? And turns out I didn't need it and I was comfortable with it, but it was that in between to make sure I was comfortable. So,
yeah, but always put the jacket on, because I've also made the mistake of not waking up enough and putting the down jacket over my quilt, and then putting my head down, and I rolled over and the quilt went one way and the jacket went the other way. And I woke up 5 minutes later, still cold. And it was like the fourth iteration where I'm like, why didn't I just put the damn thing on? It can't go anywhere if I put it on.
Because you'd have to wake up to do that.
You have to wake up to have a conscious thought. Yeah.
Oops. And then you mentioned a bivy as part of that could be part of a sleep system, right? Especially if you're underneath a tarp and you're more out in the wind. It's part of your shelter. It's part of your sleep system. It's kind of a gray area.
It all works together.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, and it's nice because you have, they're incredibly light. There's like 4 ounces or something. Maybe, no, that's not true. You can get them down to 4 ounces, or 4 to 6 or 8 ounces for a bivy. Like 12 ounces for a 4-season bivy. But once you're inside of it, you don't have any concerns about the wind. If you remember that trip we did up my evaluation hike with that heavy duty wind, I didn't even bother setting anything up. I just climbed into the bivy sack and zipped it up. And I almost always leave it open, but there was so much wind blowing that the sand and the gravel was hitting me in the face. So I zipped it up so I had the mesh wouldn't hit me in the face.
Right.
But I didn't. That was the only point of exposure, was up by the head, and down below it was nothing. And I forgot to do that once when I was out snow camping, and I was by myself, not sharing a tent, but by myself. So now I have to heat up the entire tent.
Right.
And I talked to, again, Jim Kurtz about it. He goes, well, why didn't you take your bivy sack? That way you're only warming up this much, not this whole tent. I'm like, yeah, well, I wish I would have chatted with you yesterday, but it didn't happen. I won't forget that lesson again.
Right.
Every single time. So.
Right. That's a good way to learn. Okay, we got a couple minutes for a few questions. Let's see. Sherry says, if a person sleeps cold, would a quilt provide enough warmth? It doesn't sound like it, going for lighter weight. Well, so Sandra runs a 10-degree. I don't think she's on tonight. I don't know if she runs a 10-degree or a 0-degree quilt.
I think she was on. She was on earlier. Yeah, Sandra's on.
We'll see. We'll see if she chimes in.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are quilts that are quite rated for quite cold temperatures. So if I'd probably start with a quilt for 3-season and not start with a quilt as a winter bag. So I have 2 bags. I have a dedicated winter bag that doesn't see much use, and I have a 3-season quilt. So I'd probably start with the
winter bag. What's it rated for?
My which one?
The winter bag. What do you
10 degrees.
Oh, that's right. Sorry, you mentioned.
So I sleep warm. So a 10-degree is yeah. And then Little Dipper says you can definitely get a 0-degree quilt, and I absolutely believe that. So
and I've used my 20-degree with the bivy sack snow camping in 15-degree weather.
So the challenge on that though is my temperature rating and your temperature rating is
Yeah,
going to be
exactly.
different than somebody else. Because I made that mistake one time of advising a friend that they'll be fine, leave the extra layer there, and they were shivering the entire night and mad at me the next day. So
that's when you
with
got to
caution.
your own gear.
Yeah. Doug brought up, have we ever used separate hoods with quilts in cold weather? I have not, but I know Sandra has. Sandra has bought a down hood.
Oh, yeah. Right.
And again, this is anyone that is cold. She's a good person to talk to. So maybe I'll have to do one about staying warm, right? Which is so foreign to me. It's like, what? You put on a t-shirt and you stay warm, right?
Yeah, there's a few companies that'll sell them. Some of the cottage guys that make the quilts also sell a down hood, which comes sort of down to about here, and they've got elasticized things so you put your arms through it, so it can't pop off, so it stays on you.
Yeah. Well, we did it again. We talked for a half an hour, and people stuck around and listened. So we're at time.
Surprise.
Yeah, I know. So that's all we've got for tonight. So, if you're, you can see our other shows on YouTube. We will not be here next week. We're going to take the week off for the holiday. We will be back December 2nd. And on that show, we're going to be doing another Shit Went Wrong. So we're going to talk about stories from the field. I am not a slacker, you lying dog. So with that, we're going to call it a night. Dave, thanks for coming in and sharing what you know about sleeping bags and quilts. I do appreciate it. And we'll see y'all in a couple weeks. Have a great holiday, everybody.